Welcome to FedScoop TV. I'm Colby Hochmuth. I'm sitting here with FCC Chief Information Officer David Bray. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Colby.
So David, we're here to chat a little bit about some of the upcoming trends you expect to see in 2014 and some of the things going on at the FCC. So why don't you start by just telling me a little bit about some big trends you're expecting for us to see?
Sure. So the biggest trend is secure mobility and actually trying to bring that into the government space. And I fully expect probably in about a year and a half or 2 years, the idea that people need desktops will go the way of the sort of dinosaur proverbially, and instead it will actually be tablets or laptops, and that will be the only thing people have, which then raises the question of, do you need a dedicated landline, or can you just do with one phone? And that actually, instead of having both maybe two devices, your government phone as well as your own phone, is bring your own device to work. So we're really excited about secure mobility. The other thing I think is on the interesting thing is how can you not just make your data available to the public, but your public could actually provide data if they voluntarily choose to do so that's of value to both public, private sector, as well as government. And so one example we have is we launched a broadband speed test app. The code is open source, so you can check the open source code. And if you download it, it'll actually check your broadband speed 3 times a day by provider, report that anonymously to a third party that allows us to then produce a map of the first national broadband map of crowdsourced speeds.
So how challenging is it to enable those sort of security measures on mobile devices?
So that's a good question. And in fact, what we decided we would do is we would actually make it an open question. So actually I have a blog that I did 2 days ago actually saying we're looking at field offices. We storyboarded our requirements. So actually we spent about 30 days trying to talk about what we needed. Put that out there. People can actually take a look at it and they can reply either via Twitter or actually reply in a comment field. I think it's challenging because oftentimes when they design an app, they're designing it for consumers. They're not designing it for government purposes. And the reality is actually when you look at cyber attacks, overwhelmingly, actually, the two sectors that are being hardest hit are government at about 33%, followed by large enterprises. And so consumers may not necessarily feel the pain of cyber attacks and not even think about that when they use their iPhone, but we definitely have to think about that in the government sector.
Sure. And so moving on to open data, we just passed a huge milestone with President Obama's executive order with open data. So what are some of the measures FCC is taking?
Yes, so we have more than 200 systems in which our data is, in some respects, needing to be brought out. And so what we're trying to look at is what are solutions that allow us to both bring the data out, both for internal FCC purposes, but as much as possible make that available both through our website in terms of content, but also through APIs. And so the idea is that it can also be available both for human consumption. You can go to our website, you can read it, you can comment on it, but then you can also access it through an API, application protocol interface, remix it and do your own things with it. So that in the future, if you wanted to see what existing rulemaking is going on at the FCC, or how many licenses are being used by television stations across the nation, you could actually pull that data from the FCC directly and then do your own visualizations on that. So we have some exciting things. I actually want to give a shout out for Michael Byrne, who is our Geospatial Information Officer. He does a great work and has actually been he plus James Miller have been the two behind our broadband app, which we hope to, again, make that available to the public so you can actually see the data that's coming in.
Wow. And so, in your opinion, how much work is left to be done on this open data initiative, sort of generally speaking?
Well, I think so. I think the policy's in place. It's now all about the implementation and execution, and I think that's the role of IT at the agency level, is that it's probably, it's 10% policy, 90% implementation, and I think we're just off the races with that. It's going to take some time. Okay,
great. And I know this is something that you've talked about a lot, of role of citizens in empowering government and vice versa. Maybe you can just talk to that a little bit.
Sure. I'm particularly excited because now with the availability of internet becoming more and more available to anyone everywhere, the things that we can do that don't require a large government agency to do that. So it actually could be citizens taking the initiative. One example was Code for America. They had an event in Boston where they had a massive snowstorm, and they actually wrote an app to actually have people volunteer to actually remove snow from a local fire hydrant. And so that actually saved the government the work of having to do that and actually allowed citizens to be empowered for something that benefited them. They actually then later used that code actually for Hawaii, where they needed to actually check the batteries on tsunami alarms as well. So thinking about what types of ways citizens could actually develop code at the local level, the state level, and the federal government level that actually truly embodies we the people, to me, that's the real excitement about what can we do in the next 5 years that would really be impressive.
Great. And I know you mentioned sort of as the key trend that we're going to be seeing with mobility security, but if you had to name 1 or 2 more things that everyone should sort of keep their eyes peeled for this upcoming year, what would they do?
I think also on the horizon, it's thinking about going beyond just mobile devices and actually trying to think about what's the role of actually baking in security into your code. I'm particularly interested in this because I'll be honest enough to say that if you're connected to the internet, you're inherently vulnerable. And so what can we do instead of trying to build a higher wall, because I think any wall can be overcome, how can we make it so that you quickly sort of sound the alarm, and that alarm is sounded, and then you swarm and respond to it? I mean, oftentimes if you're in a sub, the entire sub doesn't go down if there's a leak, they contain it. And so sort of developing our applications so they contain breaches like that to me is particularly interesting in the area of cybersecurity. I also think the interesting thing is actually thinking about how can you modularize when you do software development. Again, I'd like to have and be able to say to you 18 months from now that I don't have 200 different systems, I have 200 different workflows that have remixed the components in interesting ways, but it's really a much smaller base of modular components with exposed application protocol interfaces that don't require me to have 200 different systems. Because I think the big trend that we need to think about is user interfaces, they're going to come and go. I mean, the average life of an app is about 5 months before it goes out of date. User interfaces are going to come and go. Code is going to come and go as languages change. Data is much more persistent and permanent. And so how can we actually sort of deal with that change on a transformational scale?
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Colby.